Hello, all you freedom-loving people. Even with Zelensky waffling on the mineral rights deal, the confidence in the Trump presidency is strong enough, even to the point of people wanting a third term. If so, would he be running against Newsom? Okay, let's get into it. A week has passed since the talks between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States and Saudi Arabia, but the situation is constantly changing. The latest news is that on Monday, Russia's special envoy for international economic and investment cooperation told Russian media that the U.S. and Russia have begun talks on cooperation in rare earth metals with the expectation that they will jointly develop the resources within Russia's borders. The mineral agreement between the U.S. and Ukraine, which was to be signed soon, may be difficult to achieve now. President Trump said on Sunday on Air Force One that Zelensky is now trying to back out of the rare earth deal. President Trump told reporters, "We made a deal on rare earth, and now he's saying, well, I want to renegotiate the deal." But President Trump warned that President Zelensky would face big problems if he didn't sign an agreement. Even so, Ukraine has highlighted that the conditions of the deal changed significantly in recent days. President Trump clarified the issue by saying he wants to be a member of NATO. Well, he was never going to be a member of NATO. He understands that. So if he's looking to renegotiate the deal, he's got big problems. Meanwhile, President Trump also publicly expressed frustration with Russian President Vladimir Putin over the weekend. President Trump told NBC News in an interview, "I was very angry, pissed off when Putin started getting into Zelensky's credibility because that's not going in the right location, you understand? This was because Putin suggested that Ukraine be placed under temporary administration while the two countries work to reach a ceasefire agreement." But President Trump said, "But new leadership means you're not going to have a deal for a long time, right?" But I was off about it, but if a deal isn't made, and if I think it was Russia's fault, I'm going to put secondary sanctions on Russia. And when asked on Sunday on Air Force One if there's a deadline for President Putin to agree to a deal, President Trump said, "It's a psychological deadline. If I think they're tapping us along, I will not be happy about it." And today, the Kremlin said U.S. and Russian companies are interested in a rare earth partnership, but challenges remain. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said the emerging mutual interest in joint rare earth extraction is merely in the initial stage, following a period in which our relations reach their lowest point. Substantial effort will be required to rectify the situation. Peskov noted that Washington continues to impose economic sanctions on Russia and that restrictions continue to apply to American companies. So if the mineral deal goes through with Russia and not Ukraine, then President Trump would have to lift the sanctions before the mining can start. In a telephone interview with NBC News on Sunday, President Trump said that he enjoys his work and that he has not ruled out the possibility of seeking a third term as president, but President Trump is unlikely to be a three-term president under normal circumstances. We all know that under the 22nd Amendment to the U.S. Constitution of 1951, the President of the United States may serve only 2 four-year terms, regardless of whether the terms are consecutive. Roosevelt was the only president in U.S. history to serve more than 2 consecutive terms, and his presidency coincided with the Great Depression and the start of World War II, and the 22nd Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified after President Roosevelt served 4 terms. However, it's difficult to amend the Constitution. Proposals to overturn constitutional amendments require a 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress and the approval of 3/4 of the legislatures of all 50 U.S. states. But ever since Brandon Biggs, the psychic who accurately predicted that there would be an assassination attempt on President Trump, said in an interview that he saw a third term for President Trump, the topic has been on the radar. Republican U.S. Representative Andy Ogles of Tennessee introduced a resolution a few days after President Trump's inauguration in January that would allow the president to serve 3 terms, but no more than 2 consecutive 4-year terms. President Trump himself has also mentioned the possibility of a third term in public, both intentionally and unintentionally. For example, at a rally in Nevada in January this year, he half-jokingly said that it would be the greatest honor of his life to be elected not once, twice, but thrice or 4 times. He later clarified that he was referring to the 2 terms that are allowed by the Constitution. At a Black History Month event at the White House, he asked supporters if they wanted him to run again, and the chorus was 4 more years. However, some people within the Republican Party believe that President Trump's previous comments were just a joke or a parody of his critics. However, in this recent interview, he seriously reiterated that he was not joking. He said, "A lot of people want me to do it, but I basically tell them we have a long way to go. It's very early in the administration. I'm focused on the current."
Limits a president to 2 terms. Is it your understanding that they have to be?
I don't even want to talk about it. I'm just telling you, I have had more people say, please run again. They said, we have a long way to go before we even think about that. But I've had a lot of people.
And when asked if there's a strategy that would allow him to seek re-election, President Trump said there are methods which you could do it. NBC News asked about a possible scenario in which Vice President J.D. Vance would run for office and then pass the role to President Trump. And President Trump responded, that's one method, but there are others too. But he declined to elaborate. He just said, I'm focused on the current. California Governor Gavin Newsom has recently been trying to change the image of the Democratic Party. In a recent interview with Bill Maher, Newsom said that the Democratic brand is toxic nowadays. Protesting and refusing to talk to Republicans will not help save the party, and Bill Maher even praised Newsom for initiating a dialogue with conservatives. In fact, Bill Maher is doing the same thing. Last week, Bill Maher confirmed to News Nation that he's going to meet with President Trump. And today, President Trump confirmed the meeting. President Trump said that he's planning to meet with Bill Maher at the White House, along with his musician friend Kid Rock. Kid Rock was actually the one who suggested it. President Trump also said that UFC President Dana White might attend. President Trump posted on Truth Social, it might be fun or it might not, but you'll be the first to know. Who knows? Maybe I'll be proven wrong. In any event, I'm doing a favor for a friend. Bill Maher has been critical of President Trump and some of his policies. Bill Maher likened the meeting to President Richard Nixon's 1972 trip to China. At the time of Nixon's visit, the United States and China had not had official diplomatic relations for decades. Maher said that he believes the meeting is a chance to open dialogue, but it's not clear when the dinner will take place. Newsom recently launched a personal podcast. This is Gavin Newsom. He has invited conservative figures, including right-wing commentator Charlie Kirk and former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon. Newsom says that it's part of his strategy to bring the Democratic Party back from the brink of death. He said that while these guests are controversial, it's not democracy if we can't even have a dialogue. He said, this idea that we can't even have a conversation with the other side, or the notion we just have to continue to talk to ourselves or win the same damn echo chamber, these guys are crushing us. He echoed the words of Senator John Fetterman, the Democrat of Pennsylvania, that if the Democrats don't get it together, they will be a minority party forever now. Newsom stated that President Trump and the MAGA movement have dominated the current political narrative, and that's exactly why he's pushing for cross-camp communication. He pointed out that the Democratic Party's favorability ratings have fallen to just over 20% nationally, and that it'll be even more marginalized if it continues to avoid the issue. It's widely believed that Newsom is trying to pave the way for the 2028 presidential election. In 2022, he ran ads in Texas and Florida, slamming Republican governors and debating Ron DeSantis head-to-head. But now, through his podcast, he's trying to reach out to conservatives in a softer way. He's trying to parse the MAGA mentality, and he's trying to revolutionize Democratic communication education strategies and appeal to young people, while his podcast has been criticized in California as out of touch, its national impact has been better. Newsom admits that the Democrats need to face up to their problems, including failures on many policy issues, if they are going to create any momentum.
And I think with this podcast and having the opportunity to dialogue with people I disagree with, it's an opportunity to try to find common ground and not take cheap shots. I'm not looking to put a spoke in the wheel of their, or at least a crowbar in the spokes of their wheel to trip them up, to your point.
He's pointed out that Democrats have mishandled the issue of transgender male athletes participating in women's sports. He also pointed to Democrats leaning on cancel culture.
And I think it's important. Democrats, we tend to be a little more judgmental than we should be. This notion of cancel culture, you've been living it. You've been on the receiving end of it for years and years and years. That's real. And Democrats need to own up to that.
Some people in the Republican Party and those on the right are expressing surprise over Newsom's recent efforts. Megyn Kelly noted that Newsom is training himself for 2028. Bannon also said that Newsom could cause some problems for the Republican Party. Chad Bianco called his verbal judo ability on the podcast a political weapon that conservatives can't afford to ignore. But a survey of 1,000 Californians showed that 26% of respondents were less impressed with Newsom after listening to his podcast. However, his strategy is clearly not just for California, but for the whole country. And some Republican strategists see him as a gifted political figure. However, whether or not he can make the transition from podcast host to presidential candidate remains to be seen. It's also practical for Newsom to emphasize the need to understand conservative thinking. He admitted in a conversation with conservative Charlie Kirk that his son is a Kirk fan. We talked the other day about how the flaws of the U.S. education system have brainwashed the descendants of traditionalists into progressives. But the younger generation after the millennials, the Generation Z, who were born between 1997 and 2012, is the most conservative generation in decades. They were supposed to be the next generation of vote guarantors for the Democratic Party, but today they are on the other side of the aisle. In last year's general election, President Trump's support among voters aged 18 to 29 climbed significantly, even gaining a plurality of support among young males in some states. Atlas Intel's data showed that President Trump's support among that age group is already at 52.7%, and AP Votecast has documented an increase in support among young voters from 36% in 2020 to 47% in 2024. This shift is certainly a strategic earthquake for Democrats. Many political scientists and pollsters find this phenomenon incomprehensible, but for Generation Z itself, it is a belated true awakening. Generation Z grew up in an era that was dominated by leftist culture. When they were born, the mainstream was already dominated by liberal values. By the time they entered school, DEI had become a teaching credo. And by the time they stepped on to social networks, the boundaries of speech had already been mined out with political correctness. In the classrooms, they were asked to apologize for the color of their skin. On campus, they had to agree that gender is fluid. On social networks, they were encouraged to state that they support a just cause. And if they hesitated, they were labeled as transphobic, racist, fascist, and so on. They were canceled and blocked. They were indoctrinated with so-called critical race theory, and this led many to believe that the free market is exploitative, the traditional family is oppressive, history and culture are prejudicial, and religious beliefs are ignorant. As society as a whole slipped in the direction of the far left, it brought with it inflation, debt, declining education, out-of-control borders, and international chaos. So the Z generation grew up with psychological maturity accomplished in the midst of one policy catastrophe after another. And the pandemic was the catalyst for this awakening. And the Gen Z group was the only generation to experience a prolonged campus closure. Their youth was locked in Zoom rooms and isolated from policy and fear. They witnessed the double standard operation of politicians on the pandemic. the monopolization of speech by scientific so-called experts, and the oppression of dissidents on social media platforms. So they began to think, is this the world that we want to live in? And since they couldn't make their voices heard in mainstream media, they started looking to different channels to exchange information. Instead of trusting CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times, they looked to Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, and Ben Shapiro. They satirized in memes, and now they think in podcasts, and they rebuilt common sense under anonymous accounts. They began to re-embrace free speech, traditional virtues, the market economy, religious beliefs, and patriarchal structures. They are willing to reclaim the almost destroyed traditions. And this is not just a uniquely American phenomenon, but a social trend that is spreading globally. The death toll following the violent earthquake in Southeast Asia on Friday continues to rise. The quake was the largest earthquake of its magnitude this year. The Myanmar government says the death toll from the quake has risen to 2,056 people, with more than 3,900 people injured. The military government today declared the nation's flags at half-mast for a week as a sign of mourning. U.S. geologist Jess Phoenix told CNN that the quake released as much energy as more than 300 atomic bombs. She warned that the area would continue to be affected by aftershocks for months to come. The aftershocks could last for weeks or even months as the Indian plate continues to push against the Eurasian plate and the Burmese underground structure continues to squeeze. The epicenter of the earthquake was just 10 miles from Mandalay, which is Myanmar's second largest city, with an estimated population of about 1.5 million people. Due to the high population density and poor construction in the area, experts predicted that the number of casualties would rise. Myanmar was still reeling from 4 years of civil war, so the actual impact of the quake is difficult to fully comprehend at this time due to the chaos and communication breakdowns. In addition to Myanmar, the quake also caused disasters in neighboring countries. The Thai government declared a state of emergency in the capital of Bangkok. The quake was also felt in Bangladesh, Vietnam, and China. But the problem is, the whole ideology has not improved their lives. On the contrary, it created new disquiet and suffering. And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for your support of Front Page. Please remember that every like, comment, and share helps more people to see the truth. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you have already subscribed, we thank you, but please double check to make sure that you're still subscribed, because some of our audience have reported that they're somehow unsubscribed without their knowledge. We've also heard that many of you don't get notifications of our videos anymore on YouTube. So when you do subscribe on YouTube, please make sure to tap the notification bell as well. Okay, this is our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you heard today, please don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends and family, because everybody deserves to know the truth.